Hi there, it's Deb and Beck here, and we were just having a little bit of a conversation, and we decided to press record and record this conversation for you because we realise, we sometimes use words. If you're brand new and you've not seen us before with anything, then great, because you'll have a heads up for what it is we're doing. And if you've watched some of our videos and been a little bit confused before, we thought we'd kind of talk about a little bit of those places where you might get confused.
Yeah, so we're really keen to share with people what we call a simple understanding, and it's quite a spiritual understanding, and we wanted to share a bit about what that understanding actually is, because we're really aware that what can often happen is we'll be in the middle of a video or a show that we're doing and we just flippantly say principles this or Sydney Banks that, and if you don't know the kind of background to this conversation, that kind of can throw you. And I know for me, I quite kind of like to know the answer to things. So when someone said, I'm like, well, who's he and what are those? So we thought it would be a nice thing to kind of just introduce some of the kind of phrases and explanations that may well come up in stuff that you watch with us.
And also, because it is a spiritual understanding, it's not always easy to put into words. And sometimes people get frustrated because they feel like we're not sharing something or we're not saying something. And one of the things that I wanted to say here is, we are, to the best of our ability, we are. And if you are frustrated and misunderstanding something, just gently stick with us, because we've both been there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we often use the metaphor, it's a little bit like trying to explain to somebody what chocolate tastes like if they've never had chocolate. It's actually not as easy as you think, but to the best of our abilities we try and share something from our understanding and our experience. So the first thing I think we'll start with is we often talk about this understanding that we kind of share is based on something called the three principles. And that was discovered or kind of explored and explained by a man called Sydney Banks. And I think maybe I'll let Deb talk a bit about Sydney, because I think you know perhaps a little bit more a little bit more about him. But I'll perhaps start by sharing a bit about what, for me, the three principles are. So my very first thing about what the three principles are is that they're an explanation of how life works. They're not a tool or a technique or a how-to. They're just a description of how our life experience is happening moment to moment. And obviously I've said three principles, so that suggests that there's three things to share here. And so the terms that are most commonly used for these three principles are mind, thought and consciousness. And my favourite kind of way of explaining those is the cinema projector analogy. It's a very simple one and it really kind of helps people to grasp. So we talk about life works through us in the same way that a cinema projector kind of works. So you've got electricity that you probably need, or some form of power to get a cinema projector to work, and that would be mind. So there's some sort of power behind life that's giving us the energy to be alive and to work. You then need, on a cinema projector, you need a reel. You need some kind of film reel that gives you the story, and that for me is thought. We have thought, we have a story that runs through us moment to moment. And then in order for that cinema reel to project up onto a screen, you need the light. You need something that shines through it, so that on the screen you're watching in the cinema, you get the film, you get to see the story. And that for me is what we termed consciousness. So it's a very simple analogy of how we as human beings work. There's some power behind us, an energy that makes us as human beings work. Then we have thoughts that run, for me, I feel like they run through my mind, and sometimes we kind of feel them in our body a little bit too. And then there's something, a consciousness that projects those thoughts out, and we have an experience of life.
So that, in a tiny nutshell, is the principles. And this, a man named Sydney Banks had, for want of a better expression, an enlightenment experience. I think it was back in the 70s. It was a while ago anyway. And it was him, he wasn't sharing anything new. These principles that we talk about are kind of like, maybe they're a new signpost, but they're pointing to a deeper truth of who we are, a deeper truth that is behind our humanity. And it was Sydney Banks who was the first person to kind of, if you like, coin the phrase, the three principles, and speak about it in this particular way. And the way that he spoke about it was, incredibly easy for ordinary everyday people to understand, because I think human beings have been kind of curious and looking towards our spiritual nature and this deeper truth of who we are for many years. And you know, when we read very ancient texts, they can use words that we don't understand, and it can be quite difficult for us to grasp. And I think what Syd Banks did was he saw something incredibly deeply, and he managed to put it into words that ordinary people could quite easily understand. So Sydney Banks is the man who kind of first talked about the three principles and first talked about our human nature and spiritual nature in this particular way. So what were some of the other things that we wanted to?
Yeah, so the other thing I wanted to point to is they're the kind of three principles as Sydney Banks kind of described them, and they're a description of how life works. And one of the other things that I think is always really nice to remind ourselves about in it when we kind of share this is that as human beings we are innately healthy.
Yeah.
That we can get very lost in the thought storms or the kind of cinema reel that's going on in our minds.
Yes, we can.
But beneath that, we are innately healthy, and we have our own wisdom that kind of guides us through life. And for me, what we share and why we're kind of doing this video and the other videos we do is because the more we're reminded about that, the more we start to notice that's true for us too. It's true for every human being on the planet. And so for me, that's always a key one to come back to, is remembering that the basis of what we're sharing here is that you are innately healthy. And there's a lot of messages out there that imply people are broken or incomplete or need fixing. And very much we share in the opposite direction. We're pointing back to your innate health. And the only kind of, I think one of Sydney Banks' best quotes was, if the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. And that's very much at the basis of what we share, is starting to see that you don't have to be afraid of your thoughts, your experience, because beyond that, you are innately healthy.
Yeah. And Syd pointed very much towards, you know, the role that thought played in creating our experience. And I think most of us, you know, I think that's quite a common thing to look towards these days. I think we're kind of beginning to really catch on to the role that thought plays in creating our experience, and how as each of our, you know, as our thought changes, human beings, we have different thoughts. You know, if you're still watching this video, I'm guessing that you're not thinking the same thing now as when you first press play on this video. You know, thoughts just move through us and change. And as our thinking changes, so does our experience. And nobody here is saying that things haven't happened to people. You know, me and Beck have gone through life and had all sorts of things happen to us. You know, the reason that we talk about relationships, particularly through this understanding, is because both of us have had a lot of experience of not being great in relationships. So nobody's kind of saying, you know, what happened to you didn't happen. But what we are pointing towards here is exactly like Beck said, underpinning all this is this deeper truth of who we are, the fact that we are not broken, and then the fact that we have thinking, and this thinking creates our experience, and it can really look as if something else is going on. So that's this understanding.
So that's one of those, we often say this understanding or this conversation, and what we mean by that is everything we've shared in this video. We're talking about the conversation we are always going to be having is coming back to knowing what's true about us as human beings. And I think sometimes, because if people aren't familiar with the phrase three principles, to say this understanding or this conversation, that's what it is. It's coming back to knowing the truth of how we work as human beings, and that beyond our thinking we are innately healthy, and kind of bringing people always back to that starting point.
And we've both seen how incredibly impactful it is to see how human experience is created, all human experience is created, and to see a deeper truth of who we are. And together, those two things are mind-blowingly life-changing.
So I think that's our starter for you. If we're fairly visible. We've got a website, daretobeyou.co.uk. We've got a YouTube channel, Dare to Be You, and we've got a Facebook page, Deb and Beck, Dare to Be You. So there's plenty of ways you can find us wherever you've seen this video. We're about, and we would love to hear from you if you've got questions from this.
We always love to talk to people. So please feel free to get in touch in the way that makes sense to you. And take care. Bye.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.